I remember the police officer like jumping over the couch to like grab my family member's arm, and like that whole thing was that we just wanted a wellness check. We just wanted someone to come and help us.
My name is Joëlle Pouliot. I'm a journalist and a mental health advocate, and I also live with bipolar disorder. Canada is one of the most multicultural countries in the world, but the unfortunate reality is that not everyone is treated equally, especially when it comes to mental health care. Throughout my recovery, I've met people from a wide range of cultures and backgrounds, but while we were on the same journey towards recovery, our paths were wildly different. I wanted to learn more about how people from different backgrounds than mine approach getting better in the healthcare system, as well as back home and in their communities.
On a background of handwritten journal pages laid out side by side, letters in black ink form the word better. Episode 2, Culturally Competent Care.
Post-traumatic stress related to racism is a real thing. Like having constantly not only microaggressions, but macroaggressions, and then having to act like you're okay after.
Aisha Seavright is a program director with Black Mental Health Connections. Through her work, she's seen how much harder it is for people from Black communities with mental health issues to not only find support, but also understanding and empathy.
The denial of racism in Quebec is very huge. In our pilot support group, I was the facilitator, and one of the things that kept coming up was that people were very isolated growing up here, especially if they grew up in like predominantly white neighborhoods.
In my own lived experience, I've had situations where police officers have come to my house and put my family members in handcuffs, on the ground, but it was supposed to be a wellness check. That has planted a seed in my mind that I can't call police officers for a wellness check.
And I think that's like where a lot of people are within the Black community, is that you're not really allowed to have these conversations outside of your community. Otherwise, you're someone who's throwing the race card around. But literally, a Black person's life outside of the Black community is all about race. Everyone, no matter how they look at you, they're gonna treat you through this lens.
An important part of recovery for patients and caregivers is access to healthcare resources. Doctors, medication, and therapy all play a huge role in taking control of your mental health and caring for your loved one. But for caregivers and patients in many non-white communities, getting access to those resources can be a challenge.
In terms of the disparity of mental health resources and just access in general, it comes down to where do I go? Who do I trust?
One thing that like people in marginalized like BIPOC communities especially come across when seeking therapeutic care is that they have to explain their lived context to the therapist. So if it's someone who is maybe from Nigeria, they have to explain their culture, their upbringing, and the norms within their culture.
So mental health and mental illness is very complex, and it's very important that we take the time to understand the patient, to understand the family, the caregivers' concerns about what's going on, what they're observing, what they're seeing. Being more culturally competent will only help us better understand what they're going through.
Racism is a huge reason why a lot of Black people need support, but even within the community, there's a huge stigma against mental illness.
Speaking about mental health issues in my family is extremely taboo. In fact, like we haven't really spoke about it. And I often even think to myself, like, it's not my story to tell.
It was only later in my recovery journey where I realized the true scope of my privilege. How the way I look, white skin, blue eyes, from a middle-class family, made it easier for me to get access to support and medical care that took my needs into consideration. But that same level of competent care isn't always available to people with different realities from mine.
Culturally competent care is just understanding that anyone who is passing in front of you could be living under multiple different intersections. So like race, gender, socioeconomic standing, religion. Culturally competent care is being intersectional and understanding how these different facets of someone's identity interacts with their lived experience and impacts their level of mental health.
From my experience, I think that there should be more cultural consultants possibly present at work, especially here in psychiatric settings, because often when we're doing an assessment with a patient, we realize that something's missing, and often we feel like we need to dig some more. And I usually get the feeling that there's something there around the cultural piece that we're not getting.
Healthcare has historically been catered towards white patients, and while culturally competent care is gaining popularity, it's often seen as a fringe service outside of the mainstream health system in Canada. Yet every patient, family, and caregiver can benefit from receiving care that is catered to their lived experiences and culture.
I think for people who are seeking support for their mental health, who might not know where to start looking online. Just literally Googling mental health with people of your intersection or people of your experiences to see things that might have come up that you aren't aware of, that you might be experiencing.
So I think it's very important to be mindful of the fact that, people are going through something very difficult already, and we as healthcare providers and as a community need to be more understanding to make sure that we don't make things more difficult for people who are trying to access healthcare services and that are reaching out for help.
Millions of Canadians care for loved ones suffering from mental illness. There are resources available to help. Visit relief.ca/better. Described video by Mels.